Hello. This is a recording of the online book launch for Earth on Fire and Other Poems, which is the first translation into English of poems by the Creolophone and Francophone Mauritian writer René Noyau. We join the event as the host hands over to Peter Robinson, the poetry editor of Two Rivers Press. Peter Robinson from Two Rivers Press will say a few words on behalf of the publisher. Then Gérard and Peter Pegnall will read some poems from the book, and after the readings there will be a question and answer session. Please do add your questions as well as any general comments and feedback to the chat. So I've just let in one more person. And at this point, I think I'll hand over to Peter Robinson, who can introduce the book and the event. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm Peter Robinson. I'm the poetry editor at Two Rivers Press, and I'm delighted to be able to add this new book, Earth on Fire, to our translation list, which has been growing slowly but surely over the last few years. We started off a few years ago publishing posthumously the translations of Rilke's poetry made by Ruth Spears. That was our first real step into publishing translations. Since then, we've published a selection of Henri Michaud by Jane Draycott. We've published Portuguese translations of Maria Teresa Horta by Leslie Saunders. And somehow or other, it feels to me that this collection of René Noyau's poetry comes out of those two books. I remember Gérard writing to me some years ago now, it must be, suggesting that perhaps his work might fit in to what we were doing, and it didn't take me very long to decide that I thought that was exactly right. We're hoping to publish a book of poetry in translation every year. Next year we've got a book lined up of Philippe Jacotet's poetry, which sadly Philippe died just recently, but we'll be putting that together to come out in the spring of next year. But the spring of this year, we have Earth on Fire, which it's our first absolutely bilingual edition, in the sense that I think everything in it, except possibly the colophon at the back, is in both English and French. On which note, I shall hand over to Gérard and Peter to take us through some of the contents of this wonderful book, with a very beautiful painting by our own Martin Andrews on the cover of the author himself, and designed and laid out in classic Two Rivers Press fashion by our own Nacha Gucci. So Gérard, would you like to come in and take over from there?
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. This is my wife, Diana, and we are pleased to see all of you. It is an international gathering, which Zoom makes possible. If we had had a traditional launch, we wouldn't have had so many different people from France, Japan, Germany, Switzerland, Mauritius, Portugal, USA, Ireland, and the UK.
It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. We are here to celebrate the publication of Earth on Fire, Terre en Feu et autres poèmes by Two Rivers Press. The poems are by my father, Joseph René Noyau, probably born in November 1911. He died in September 1984. He was largely unknown in Mauritius, outside Mauritius. And when I started work on him in 2010, he was fading fast in people's memories in Mauritius. And this, in spite of the fact that he had launched surrealism in Mauritius, that he had relaunched Mauritian Creole in literature, that he had espoused negritude and celebrated his African ancestry at a time when things African were not prized in Mauritius. And in spite of the fact that his poem Sega de Liberté, Sega of Freedom, which we are going to read later on, is read or referred to or printed on an annual basis when the abolition of slavery is celebrated in Mauritius. Why is he unknown? Some say it's because he was not published by a major editor in France. But I find the argument presented by Robert Furlong very convincing. René used so many pseudonyms, more than 10, that he became lost behind so many identities. His writing spans 5 decades, from early 1930s to late 1970s. He was a poet. He was also a chronicler, a playwright, short story writer, polemist, aphorist, and essayist. René Noyau, the poet, is lucky to find himself published in bilingual format, French and English for the first time. His poems were translated by me with the help of Peter Pegnall, who will also be helping with the readings today. I have to thank Two Rivers Press in the persons of Peter Robinson, Sally Mortimer, Anne Noland, Nadia Guji, Sally Castle, Barbara Morris. I've got to thank Two Rivers Press to have chosen to publish, and then painstakingly arrive to this beautiful, beautiful looking book. I should mention and thank Martin Andrews for his portrait of my father, which enhances the cover, and also Robert Furlong in Mauritius, and in Britain, Jane Draycott, Alan Howe, and Leslie Saunders, who have helped me in their various ways to complete this project. I divided the book in 6 sections, and so the poems are not presented chronologically. And the 6 sections are: first steps, premier pas, in and out of love, amour et désamour, through a glass darkly à travers un miroir opaque, un yoke surrealism, briser les chaînes, surréalisme, un yoke, African poems, briser les chaînes, poème africain, and last, prayers, prière. Our readings will follow the pattern of the book, with 1 poem from each section. First section, premier pas, first poems, early poems. We have chosen Corambe, or have chosen Corambe. It was published in a very short-lived Mauritian magazine called Verger Orchards in 1933, when René was 21. When we last read it together, Peter Pegnall said, he exclaimed, "That's a young man's poem." It is indeed a young man's poem. The theme is there's lassitude, dreams of other shores, death, all the conventional themes to please those who took themselves to be the arbiters of good poetry at the time in Mauritius. To add to its strength, in their eyes, the poem rhymes and has punctuation marks, top marks for that. So René could have formed part of the Mauritian poetic establishment if he had continued in this vein, except he didn't. Just would like to say the last 2 lines were quoted. The last line of the poem was quoted in an obituary in 1984 when René died. The poem was also read at my brother-in-law's funeral in 1917 and at my sister Jeanette in 2018 in French and in an English translation by my nephew, Dominic Scott. So I'll read the French. Corimbe. Les roses meurent, lentes et claires, ces roses d'octobre. Par la fenêtre ouverte, un ray de lune lent entre doucement en balançant le store blanc. Rien ne vibre, seule la lampe pétille et mon esprit en vouloir de s'éteindre. Ce soir est tendre et bien comme un rêve d'enfant, mais j'ai passé longtemps ce temps des plus beaux rêves. Laissez-moi déchirer et jeter dans le vent ces lauriers qu'on a mis flétris sous mon auvent. Je ne veux rien. Je vais partir pour d'autres rives. Hier est mort, aujourd'hui est bien vieux, d'éclat teinte. Peter.
The roses die, slow and clear, these October roses. By the open window, a slow ray of moonlight comes in gently, swinging the white blind. Nothing pulses, only the lamp sparkles and my spirit, willing itself to fade away. The evening is tender and comfortable, like a child's dream. But I have long outlasted the time of the most beautiful dreams. Let me tear and throw into the wind these withered laurels they have placed under my roof. I do not want anything. I want to leave for other shores. Yesterday is dead. Today is very old. The bells toll. I think you can hear it was an enormous struggle, and the pride in my language and the resources of English, especially with those wonderful French, the R sounds. I felt we were not in competition, were we, Gérard? I don't think, but there was that element of trying to find an equivalent in English, and not always an equivalent rather than a version. I think that's and that's to do with the music as well. So I hope there's a living dialogue. The second poem is an extraordinary love poem, and I think within the scope of the poem it shows you precisely how René, well, he had rules, but they were his own. And the very beginning of this poem, The Colour of Time, is a very conventional love poem. And had it gone on like that, I'm not sure we'd have been reading it. So I will never be able to tell you all the beautiful things I dream for you. So much the voice of my desire holds me back. I mean, you can make it sound resonant, but as the poem proceeds, it questions the experience of love. It questions the regularity of the form. So the rhythm takes you over. There's a section which is really a prose poem. And as Gérard said, you know, farewell punctuation, hard then to translate because you are, well, we've only got so much breath, haven't we? And of course, breath is what's to do with organic rhythm. But I won't go on anymore, but I think you'll find that the poem itself, whilst attending to the notion, of course, that love is a complicated emotion, and it's not one that can be dealt with by somebody saying, I'll never be able to tell you how much I love you. It goes beyond that. It cracks that stereotype. So Gérard will read it in English now.
I will never be able to tell you all the beautiful things I dream for you. So much the voice of my desire holds me back. A black barge heavy with fish, which we see because they move, because they struggle, just as some very sensitive men against the air, which is hard to breathe, the air full of moon filings. Oh, how hard it is, conscience, to live when the night is so clear, when the smell of victory cries out too loud, when pride fights within the claws of desire. But all these things, how can I offer them to you, except with my hands crossed, eyes shut, lips closed, except with music which makes my love fold on itself, the music of this inner poem, which is too gentle and too violent, too subtle and too precise, too tender and too harsh. This music so intimate that I fear for the radiance of the world if it moves. The keyboard comes alive, lights up for a melody so sweet and so gentle, in an illusion of waves which break on the sand to regain strength. Memories force forward, form a chain, a circle, and dance. My head spins. I see the face of a healthy little boy who smiles across my 27 years. I see the face of a man of my age who sobs behind the screen of my childhood. I see the face of a woman, then another, then a multitude of faces. I can hardly recognize me in this circle of memories, in these memories which form this chain of women, in this chain of waves so sweet and so tender that provokes the fiery strength of the keyboard, your fingers. Now we come to the third part, third section, which we put the title of Through a Glass Darkly. À travers un miroir opaque. And in this poem, I'm going to read Portrait de ma sœur, Portrait of my sister. It's an interesting description. You can see that he wants really to hurt, I think. His sister, most probably, remembering her Aunt Gabrielle, most probably has chastised him. Why, I don't know. Possibly for not going to church, because I was chastised by them for not going to church and promised that I would go to hell. And there is the description of that sister. Un visage d'un brun pâle et mâle sourit à demi enchâssé dans le cadre. Sourcils hirsutes, regard de mourant ressuscité de 914. Une petite bouche affreuse et douce, un corps articulé, une loque dans une laque noire. La petite bouche parle de saints, de paradis et d'autres mots gros comme les saints. On l'a dit femme, on l'a dit sainte, mais elle fume et mange et joue et prend des boissons fortes. C'est un être asexué et cynique comme une orange verte.
Portrait of my sister. A face pale brown and male, a half smile set in the frame, bushy eyebrows, a look of the dying risen again, of 914, a small mouth, ghastly and sweet, a mechanical body, a wreck in black lacquer. Her small mouth speaks of saints, of paradise, and other words fat as breasts. They call her a woman, they call her a saint, but she smokes and eats and gambles and takes hard liquor. She is a sexless creature and cynical as a green orange. Thank goodness I haven't got a sister.
Fourth part, briser les chaînes surréalism. That's where he breaks links with the past, just like surrealism did in France. He was 22 and he felt himself good enough to be able to challenge all those who had set themselves as the arbiters of good poetry. Those people who were stuck in the 19th century. And it is interesting in this poem, after reading this poem, that the old guard would be very unhappy because the attack is direct. And he even talks about he mentions that to be a writer, you need 20 smackers, the cost of a racket and balls. And one of the person he was attacking was actually a tennis player, and he couldn't have missed the allusion. Now, in this poem, he mentions Lamartine, a French romantic poet, 19th century. He also mentions Hugo, who you know, Les Misérables, and we have this poem. It comes from L'Ange au pied des reins, the angel with feet of bronze, a collection that contained only 7 poems because he had to pay for the publication and he only had money for 7 poems. Here we go. I think Peter is going to read the English first.
So I am. Sorry, it's because you changed the introduction. I'm good. The angel with feet of bronze. At this degree of latitude, we would die of cold and ennui if the bourgeois had not invented the calorific engine of stupidity. What can we do? To be a writer, one needs 20 smackers, the cost of a racket and bulls. We worship at the botanical gardens, immortality in miniature, in plated bronze, stuffed Panama, fedora, top hat unfold like a skein of Lamartine. What can we do? Idolizing Hugo is also the fashion. Oh, my heart, this dog of a heart, this heart of a dog crushed under the 1934 Express. And this first prize that I was promised, if only I played the sentimental.
L'Ange au pied des reins, poem number 2. À tel degré latitude sud, on crèverait de froid et d'ennui si les bourgeois n'avaient inventé le mécanisme calorifique des bêtises. Que faire? Pour faire de la littérature, il faut au moins 20 balles, le coût d'une raquette et des balles. On vénère au jardin des plantes l'immortalité en miniature, blonze plaquée, empaillée. Panama, feutre, eau de forme, se déroule comme un écheveau lamartinien. Que faire? L'ugolâtrie aussi est à la mode. Aïe, mon cœur, ce cœur de chien, ce chien de cœur, écrasé sous le rapide 1934. Et ce premier prix qu'on m'a promis, si je devenais sentimental. Again, in the same way that he unyoked surrealism, he also unyoked Africa in Mauritius. He did that with a series of writings, including poems, which he labeled African, Poem African. Now, at the time in Mauritius, I had mentioned already, things African were not prized, but despised. But he challenged that. He was part African and proud of being so. But he was also political, devoted to politics, found how the Africans, the descendants of the slaves, were being kept in chains. And so he wrote the poem Sega de Liberté, Sega of Freedom. Sega is a Mauritian dance and song. And here he really is talking about that Sega links the descendants of Africans to Africa and Madagascar. And so in this poem, he bemoans the fact that nothing is left of their ancestry. So he refers to ceremonies that other Africans have, like the turning of the dead, the famandihana, which is practiced, which is a traditional funerary rite in Madagascar. The remains of the dead are taken from the family crypts, rewrapped, and then returned to the crypt. He also refers to the lamba, which is a cotton or silk cloth, which forms part of the traditional dress of the Madagascan woman. And finally, he refers to baka. The baka is the fermented drink which comes from ancestral times. Peter is going to read the complete poem in English. I'm going to read the last part of the poem in French. It's long. Peter?
Sega of Freedom. No, we do not have totems. We do not turn the bones of our dead. We do not have lambas or plaits woven on the heads of our daughters. We do not slaughter the fattened bull at the birth of our sons. We do not slaughter the bull, but the baka flows like water, even when it is not about a son, when it is only about a daughter. When we must arrange the weddings of our children and the children of our children, or lead back a dead person to the earth. No, we do not have totems, but to revere the one who leaves, to welcome the one who comes. The baka flows like water. Oh, the baka flows in every vein. No, we do not have totems, but we keep watch at the very end of the earth, which is the same here and there, the earth tasting of sweat and of baka. The baka we offer to the earth so that our bread might taste of it. And when we eat this bread from the earth, when we give it to our children, when we offer it to our dead, baka flows like water. Oh, the baka flows from everywhere in the veins of the earth to give us the taste of this bread of freedom. No, we do not have totems, but the cord of our navels belong over there, in the land of totems, in the land of lambas and plaits on the heads of your daughters. And the baka flows like water, because it will soon be 300 years that the cords of our navels are buried under the bones of sacrificial bulls to give us this deep-rooted taste of freedom. No, we do not have totems. We now only have the color of our skin to identify us to the bread of freedom. We now only have the sega to hold us in this exile, land between seas. We now only have the sega to unite us. We not only have the sega that has been put on the shelf among all the loaves of bitter peace, which are offered everywhere to confuse us and to confound our hunger for freedom, but it has been 300 years that we have watched out for the sound of the drum, asleep underground where the cord of our navels is buried. No, we do not have totems, but it has been 300 years that the sega has been waiting for the signal of the drum to rise and wrap itself all around the earth, to make all the cords of our navels rise and wrap themselves around the earth, and the baka flowing like water in our veins of earth sets us to dance the dance of the stars in freedom. No totem, but our desire for freedom has driven us mad for freedom. Just like the drum yielding his skin to the fire, we yield ourselves to all our brothers who fight in the midst of fire for freedom. Just like the drum close to the fire, we brothers are ready to lead this sega of freedom.
As I said, I'll be reading the last part of the poem. Nous n'avons plus que le sega pour nous tenir dans cet exil, terre entre mers. Nous n'avons plus que le sega pour nous unir. Nous n'avons plus que le sega que l'on a mis à la boutique parmi les pains de paix amers qui sont offerts partout pour nous confondre et pour confondre nos désirs de liberté. Les 300 ans que nous guettons le son du tambour endormi dans la terre où la corde de nos nombrils est enfouie. Nous n'avons point de totem, mais 300 ans que le sega attend le signal du tambour pour se lever et s'enrouler tout autour de la terre, pour se lever et s'enrouler tous les cordons de nos nombrils autour de la terre. Et le baka coulant comme de l'eau dans nos veines de terre, nous faisant danser la danse des astres en liberté. Point de totem, mais le désir de liberté ont fait de nous des êtres fous de liberté. Tel le tambour sifflant au feu, nous nous offrons à tous nos frères qui luttent dans le feu pour la liberté. Tel le tambour auprès du feu, nous sommes frères prêts pour mener ce sega de liberté.
I'm going to now read a poem which in fact has appeared in English before in a volume called Pestilence, and it's received a considerable amount of applause just for that. And it is a kind of in a way, it's a kind of farewell. It's also very clearly a political poem, and I really stress this, it's a political poem which doesn't brandish freedom as a right. It addresses it as a responsibility. And that seems to me to be so current an issue. It's where rhetoric ends and something like the reality of art takes over, where art is a greater reality than rhetoric. See if you agree. I think it's it grows within you, this poem. For a just justice. Now, since we need to bend, let us ease free our shoulders from this false and heavy pride. Since we need to bend in front of the Supreme Being, for the final hour will soon toll. We, the powerful of this earth, the kings of gold, let us strip ourselves of our human subterfuge. Let us tear off our masks of passion. Let us hurl back the fine cloak of morality and religion. Let us go back to our core, and without too much strain, let us very slowly try to play the devout, the good apostle, the angel. Let us try, since we need to bend now.
Pour une juste justice. Maintenant, puisqu'il faut nous courber, débarrassons notre échine de ce faux et lourd orgueil, puisqu'il faut nous courber devant l'être suprême. Car l'heure finale doit bientôt sonner. Nous, les puissants de ce monde, les rois de l'or, dépouillons-nous de nos artifices humains. Ôtons les masques passionnels, rejetons le beau manteau moral et religieux, remettons-nous au niveau de nous-mêmes et, sans trop de grimaces, essayons tout doucement de faire le pieux, le dévot, le bon apôtre, l'ange. Essayons, puisqu'il faut nous courber maintenant. Anyway, Peter? Okay, this was the final reading of a poem by René, and I really hope that you found them as interesting, as powerful, as good to read aloud, as we have done, Peter and me. Peter and me have spent quite a lot of time working on these poems. And we've done so, when we were doing so, we were having fun. It was a serious exercise, but not laden with heaviness. It was very light. We discussed and we arrived to certain decisions. So if you have enjoyed this poem, I would really recommend the book. Please get it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gérard. Thank you, Peter. I really enjoyed listening to those readings. Thank you. We have got a few questions for you. I'm going to start off. First question is from Alan Scott, who asks, Gérard, are you working on any other projects to publish or promote René's works?
I think I'm always working on projects, and projects nothing to do with René, like gardening and stuff like that. But I'm working on some, one thing which is not to do with René. I'm working, Peter and I are starting a new collection of poetry, which we are going to co-edit. But as far as René is concerned, I have translated, or with Peter, all the poems, the short poems of René. And that's almost ready to, it's only, we have to find an editor. There are two poems by René, which are very long, maybe 20 pages each. And one is a political poem called The Friends of the People Are Watching. And the second one is a dramatic poem called The Race of Abel, first part. Both of them, again, I've translated, but Peter has not really looked, we haven't worked together on them. And then thirdly, I've just started translating René's African writings, those that are in prose. And there's one which is fantastic, which is called Présence africaine à l'île Maurice, African presence in Mauritius. It's one of the most fantastic description of the traditional Sega, the Sega that has been now modernized, has become a dance of ballrooms, a dance for tourists. But so that's what happened. But there's also a possibility that I've got to look into, is actually getting the poems published in France. So quite a lot of projects.
Great. There's a question from Dominic Scott, and that's a question for Two Rivers Press. Thank you for publishing this book. It's a lovely presentation of my grandfather's poems. How many copies do you expect or hope to sell? And also, which countries? I think that's a very hard question to answer with any certainty. We have printed 250 copies to start with. If the book takes off, obviously we will reprint. In terms of selling to which countries, the book is available globally via our distributors and can be bought through online global booksellers such as Amazon and Book Depository. And we can also ship worldwide from our website. So we can send the book globally, and we hope people will buy it from many different countries. Another question. This one's from Alan Howe on the art of translation. It's quite a long question, I'll read it out. Congratulations, Gérard, and huge thanks for making René's writings available. And congratulations as well to you and also to Peter for the great achievement of providing translations that sound and read like poetry. And it's translation that I'd like to ask you about. Translating is hardly ever easy, even when it's dealing with apparently simple everyday sentences. Then when it comes to translating poetry, that's notoriously daunting. And all the more so in a case of a modern poet like René, whose verses are so elusive and evocative, elusive even, and willfully challenging, where a single word or line or whole passage of the original French may allow the reader to tease out several different possibilities of interpretation. I was wondering if you'd like to say a little about the approach you adopted at such moments, what your overriding priorities and strategies as a translator were.
Very broad question. Most release of that shows the background Alan comes from, the lecture room. I will try, and then Peter most probably will add things to it. The first thing, when we started it, I don't think it was daunting, because we were not thinking of publication. We were just thinking, let's look at it, let's see whether we can translate it and see what happens. And the first poem we translated, actually, Peter didn't like. And so it was the first poem from L'Ange au pied des reins, Surrealist, a poem about depression, the poet's depression, but also depression in the climate, the two together. But anyway, so we moved on to a poem from his second collection. And what we tried to do from the beginning, I think, was, it wasn't daunting, because again, as I said, we were not thinking of publishing at the same time, at that time. But what we tried to do from the beginning was to try to, as Alan mentioned, to tease out as many meanings as we could. And so it meant reading the original several times and putting the individual poems in the context of the other poems that he's written. And then the other, so we really wanted to convey the meaning of the poem, but we also wanted from the beginning to try to achieve something that did not sound like a translation. We wanted to have something that sounded English, and that's what we tried to do. And I think it's more the approach that really reveals quite a bit. What we did was for me to translate. So read the poem, understand it, and then write down what I thought the translation would be, and sometimes having several possibilities. And then later on, re-looking at what I'd written and compare it to the French, remove some of the possibilities, and end up with something which was in black and many lines in red, so that when we met, we would look at what we'd written, discuss, and then come to a final view. And sometimes there's one poem I've got in mind called Notre Ascendance, Our Ancestry, that actually was not, it's perhaps the most difficult, at least I found, that there were certain lines that stayed in red for about 6 months before we finally came to a conclusion. Now, not daunting because we're not looking for a publisher, but when we'd completed a set of poems, that then we thought maybe there's something in what we've done. So we talked to certain friends and read the poems in public and decided that it was worth publishing. And we found a publisher in Two Rivers. Peter, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I'll be very brief. I think that I do feel honoured. I didn't feel honoured at first, to be honest, because I had a very bad chest condition, and Gérard, a lovely, friendly, amiable man, as you can see, approached me at the end of a particularly tedious, really, celebration, and asked me if I would be interested in reading his father's poems. And I'm not even sure if he said that they were in French. Oh yeah, he must have done, because I was there to read an English poem which had been translated by a friend of mine into French. And so I took a well being a convert, didn't I, actually, Gérard? My heart sank to start with, to be perfectly honest. But very quickly we found we could work together. And I think it's possible, the analogy between writing comedy and doing a translation. Firing off each other was really an important thing, wasn't it? It made it, yeah, it made it a pleasure, but also very responsible. So we had because we live less than a mile from each other, so we would meet once a week, but it would allow the words to gestate, it would allow rhythms and things. And you know how you dream, you wake up and you have a solution to something. So I'm kind of speaking loosely rather than in a scholarly way, because that's precisely how I experienced it. But there was one particular afternoon, and I have to say this to you, whether it's not embarrassing, but it's meaningful, I think. The sun was shining on Gérard and his glorious halo of hair, and it just occurred to me, your dad's listening, and he's sort of brushed. He's a very modest man. He brushed it aside, and I said, no, he's listening. He's in heaven, actually listening, and you're his son, and you've made contact with him, which is very, very rarely available, I think, for a son and father. So I've taken it away into the personal, but doesn't poetry do that all the time? In fact, if it doesn't do it, what's it doing, really? Thank you.
Couple of more short questions. One from Leslie Saunders is to Gérard. Did René know about or even read any of your translations of his work?
No, because he died in 1984, and I never lived under the same roof as my father. My mother divorced him when I was a baby, but I got to know him not as a father, but more as an interesting, very interesting man with this strong sense of self, and I was just fortunate that he left me his writings, but I was going to keep the writings, put them on the computer for the benefit of the family, nothing more than that. And it's only in 2010 that I started looking at his works. And so So he was dead. Although Peter mentions him looking at us from heaven, I don't know whether he was looking at, whether when we started translating, he was looking at us.
Okay. And then a short one from Dom Scott. He says, I translated Coramb too. How long did it take you?
Coramb was one of the, I don't know, easier one to translate, I suppose, because it's more conventional than the other, and you didn't have to work out the punctuations and stuff like that because it was there. And a young man's poem, and also the fact that it was dealing with conventional themes. So it was not, I don't know, I really don't know. If I said 10 minutes, I would be lying. If I said a week, it would be lying.
Okay. Thank you. We've had some lovely comments on the chat as well. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I wanted to read one of them out from Jimmy Harmon, who says, today is International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The writings of René Noyau have particular resonance in Mauritius. So that's...
yeah.
So it's 5 to 6, we're sort of coming up to the end. So I think I'm going to hand over to Peter Pegnall, I think, for some closing remarks. Is that right? Or is
Honestly,
it Peter Robinson?
I think I've burbled long enough. Maybe I'll just take my favourite quote from Auden about translation, well, and many other things as well. He has this wonderful sentence, the words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. And I think if we've done anything, and really I am a support, you know, a little bit of scaffolding here and there, then that's what we'd be aiming for.
And Gérard, did you have any closing comments?
No, I think you've had enough of me. I think it's Peter Robinson.
Yeah, I put you on mute, Peter. Oh, there you are.
I've just unmuted myself. Yes, it's the day, the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. It's also, as chance would have it, I certainly didn't plan this, World Poetry Day. So I think what we've just done fits only too well into both of those things, and hopefully we're in tune with the zeitgeist in that respect, and that you'll all go out and buy the book. And so and we've printed as many as Bloomsbury published for the first edition of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. So let's hope that we can sell that run out, and maybe even sell as many as Joe.
Lovely.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Great.
Bye.
So thank you all very much for coming, and
buy the book.
I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Huge thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fabulous.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very
much.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you. That was great.
Bye.
Merci. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That was extraordinary. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, thank you, Leslie.